The Writer's Stage, Unit 1, Childhood, Lesson 6, Emphasis. Infancy is left behind as the child learns to speak. At first, the child's speech is greeted with excitement, welcoming him or her into the human community. Yet I suspect one of the first lessons children learn about their speech is that it can easily be ignored. And to avoid being ignored, children learn to create emphasis. They learn how to force others to hear them, usually by shouting. Rhetorically, they're not sophisticated, but they get what they want. I believe children discover the importance of creating emphasis nearly as soon as they learn to speak. Indeed, they may learn to speak so that they can be even more emphatic about their wants than when their speech was limited to wails and gurgles. As children grow, they learn to create emphasis in more sophisticated ways than by increasing the volume of their voice. Much of our success in communication lies in knowing how to create the right emphasis at the right moment. Consequently, creating emphasis in writing is the focus of this lesson and of the final lesson of subsequent units. Though matters of emphasis are dealt with as you are organizing and drafting a composition, I believe finally at a more sophisticated level, emphasis can best be examined after you've finished a draft. So after you draft, take a look at your essay and choose what you would like to emphasize. There are several important lessons about emphasis. Number 1, the order of the information is important. The end and beginning of an essay are the points of greatest emphasis. That's why it's especially important to capture the reader's attention in the introductory paragraph, and why the conclusion needs to somehow emphasize the essay's main idea or thesis and leave the reader thinking. It's also why I provide you with handouts in Lesson 5 describing effective introductions and conclusions. Lesson 2, the amount of information, is also important. In other words, if you want us to really see your point, the more details, the better. Even a superficial look at the length of paragraphs in an essay will indicate this point. Often, essays' paragraphs are approximately the same length. Sometimes, people use shorter paragraphs to serve as transitions, but often a short paragraph means the information is less important. Similarly, long paragraphs mean the subtopic is very important, but if a paragraph is too long, you lose the audience. The point here is that the amount of space you give an idea influences the amount of emphasis that idea will receive. The third lesson is that the tone of voice and the sort of language used is important. You can create emphasis by controlling the syntax of your sentences and your specific choice of words. When I refer to the syntax of a sentence, I refer to the relation of words within a given sentence or passage. You should keep in mind that any use or arrangement of words that calls attention to itself will create emphasis. Of course, the goal is to control the points of emphasis in your writing and not emphasize things that distract from your purpose. And of course, number 4, the essay does need a point, a thesis. One of the reasons grammatical errors are important to avoid is that they call attention away from the thesis and instead suggest a deficiency in the writer. The same thing happens if a word is misused or if inappropriate language is used. Good writers use emphasis to make their thesis more effective and try to avoid anything that would distract from the thesis. In this lesson, I'll describe one of several sentence patterns that we will discuss in this course. The first one is called parallelism. Following that, I will introduce the figures of speech polysyndeton and asyndeton, and the trope onomatopoeia. We'll practice these in Writer's Journal 6, and hopefully some of those sentences will find their way into the final copy of your essay. Parallelism is another way of creating emphasis in sentences. Parallelism is the grammatical principle of balance. It creates a rhythmic, pleasing effect if used properly, both by creating emphasis and clarifying meaning. For example, we hear parallelism all the time in advertising slogans. KFC once had a slogan, "Buy a bucket of chicken and have a barrel of fun." Notice the slogan has 2 sentences joined by "and." Each complete thought is an imperative or a command, buy and have. They both have short phrases of the same length and construction that follow those verbs. A bucket of chicken, a barrel of fun. That is parallelism. For example, you might use parallelism to describe a range of experiences encountered in writing an essay. This type of parallelism is keeping items in a list in the same form. Perhaps you've even had this experience. I might write, from the first moment of discovery, through the long hours of revision, to the final hurried minutes of editing, the essay seemed to resist my efforts to say what I meant. In this sentence, the parallel phrases in bold type emphasize the scope of the writing process. There are 3 items in this list of sorts, or 3 steps the writer is referring to. Those items or steps need to be in the same form to be parallel. In a simpler example, I might write, the steps of the writing process which I find most challenging are the organizing and revising phases. The 2 items in this list are organizing and revising. You would never write, the steps of the writing process which I find most challenging are to organize and revising, right? That would just sound odd. In that sense, parallelism usually comes naturally, but in more complicated examples, like the first sentence, a writer might miss the consistent use of prepositions from, through, and to, and even the repetition of the article the to emphasize that list. The first rule, then, of parallelism is that all items in a list must be in the same form. Another rule of parallelism is that pairs of ideas need to be parallel. Consequently, parallelism is especially important when you are comparing or contrasting topics, as you are in the assignment for this unit. As a rule of thumb, parallelism is effective whenever you wish to emphasize the relatedness of 2 or more ideas. If I were to compare my mother's math experience to my own, I might write, neither my mother nor I understood the simple relationship between numbers which so many other children easily piece together. The underlined words neither and nor indicate that 2 items are working in pairs. What follows the neither, in this case the noun my mother, must also follow the nor, in this case the pronoun I. In fact, 2 subjects, my mother and I, follow the neither and the nor. I could have rewritten the sentence to challenge the parallelism a bit. My mother and I neither understood nor appreciated the fervent enthusiasm of our teachers. In this case, what follows the neither is a verb, just as what follows the nor is a verb. Parallel elements give emphasis to those elements and to their relationship, creating a cohesive quality to a sentence. For more information on parallelism, see Easy Writer section 17. In addition to rhetorical sentence patterns, special emphasis can be created using figures of speech and tropes. To simplify things, I'll refer to all of these elements as rhetorical devices. I am not so concerned about your remembering whether something's a figure of speech or a trope, but I am concerned that you learn to use those devices to elevate your writing style. Using the devices can seem risky, and they certainly take a bit of effort, but playing with language, like child's play, will enhance your creativity. The figure of speech, polysyndeton, is the repetition of the conjunctions and. Polysyndeton is especially appropriate for the childhood stage. When children first begin to expand their thoughts, they rely greatly on the conjunction and. During childhood, all experience is an addition of 1 or more new and exciting wonders or fears. Repeating the and captures that feeling. This is polysyndeton. Even polished and professional writers use the repetition of and to great effect. For example, Shakespeare's Macbeth uses this in his famous speech, tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow. He says, tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow creeps in this petty pace from day to the last syllable of recorded time. Polysyndeton is merely the repetition of conjunctions in a series. The effect can be terrific. The effect here is to slow the pace of the sentence. We hear Macbeth's utter despair in his tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow. You might use polysyndeton to describe the amount of work you have for this course. I have to write journals and listen to videos and take notes and draft essays and submit those essays. You can hear the emphasis of the number of items in that list. Conversely, asynenton is the omission of conjunctions from a series. Aristotle, in his work Rhetoric, wrote, "This is the villain among you who deceived you, who cheated you, who meant to betray you completely." James Joyce wrote, "Consciousness of place came ebbing back to him slowly over a vast tract of time, unlit, unfelt, unlived." Both examples, I might add, are parallel sentences. Aristotle and Joyce used asynenton to great effect, particularly at the end of sentences. Aristotle's asynenton emphasizes the deception of the villain, while Joyce uses asynenton to create rhythmic effect of a relentless pace. Finally, having discussed sentence patterns and two figures of speech, I want to introduce the trope onomatopoeia. At some point in your English education, the idea of onomatopoeia has probably been presented to you. Onomatopoeia occurs when the sound of a word reinforces its meaning. Of course, you can think of many such words. The bees buzz, and the coyote howls, and the birds chirp. In fact, there's no comic book that would be complete without a boom, biff, crash, or bam. Onomatopoeia is not, however, only something in children's books. As you compose and revise your essays, you may be able to select words, frequently verbs, that sound like their meaning. The use of onomatopoeia can add immediacy to a sentence, giving additional emphasis to your meaning by adding sound. You might look at the student draft at the end of Unit 1 to see how rhetorical devices can be used for emphasis. Playing with words and sentences is an endless activity. How do you know when you've played enough? You quit playing as a child when you're called in at bedtime. Writers revise until they're faced with a deadline. Your deadline's coming up. You should finish up your draft and post it to the Lesson 5 discussion forum. There is no video for Lesson 5, but you should read the instructions carefully so that you're a helpful, constructive editor to your peer.